So now that we are 3 weeks into the NHL season, it's time for our weekly power rankings. Make sure to check us out every Friday for a weekly power ranking. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe, and let's take a look at how things are stacking up in the NHL for week 3. Alright, so starting things off with this week's power rankings, we're taking a look at the Metropolitan Division and looking at number 8 at the bottom of the Metro, moving down a spot. Really not much of a surprise to anybody, as they've been talked about this week for their struggles, is the New Jersey Devils, moving from 7 to 8. They are 1-4-2 on the season, 1-2 this week, so not a great week for the New Jersey Devils. 3-0 loss in Boston earlier this week. They would lose in a matinee game at home to the Florida Panthers 6-3, as well as beating the New York Rangers last night 5-2. So a big victory there to close things out. Jack Hughes gets his first point. What do the New Jersey Devils have to do? Well, things have not gone well for the Devils this year so far, and they finally picked up a victory against a big rival, a Hudson River rivalry against the New York Rangers. So good on the Devils there, getting a big victory. They needed that one. Again, there's been a lot of talk about the Devils. We saw the assistant general manager go behind the bench, possibly to make a little bit of a change, maybe see what's going wrong with this team. Is it John Hines? Is it the players? Is it, something in the locker room? It was kind of, Tom Fitzgerald's job to kind of scout what's going on with the Devils. Obviously, things have not gone well. They've got a very young team. And make sure to check out our most recent video where we talked about the New Jersey Devils struggles and possibly how they could fix them. Make sure to check that out. Here on Goal Line Hockey. So, with that, done with looking at number 7, thanks to the Devils' struggles. At number 7, moving up a spot, is the Columbus Blue Jackets, who went 3-3 during the season so far, 2-1 this week. A game against the Anaheim Ducks, where they would lose 2-1. They would head down to Carolina and beat the Carolina Hurricanes 3-2, and they would beat the Dallas Stars 3-2. As they continue this homestand. So this is definitely going to be, a team that's in transition. We talked about how they lost Sergei Bobrovsky all summer, Artemi Panarin, as well as some of those rentals that they picked up at the deadline, losing a couple of draft picks as well. So, overall, this is not a bad start for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Unfortunately, it's kind of what we expected out of the Columbus Blue Jackets, to be toward the bottom. It's still very early. I still really like that defense. And you have some really solid players up front in guys like Alex Texier, who we've seen really come onto the scene. Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's really becoming a leader there in Columbus. So things are going in the right direction. It's a slow transition for the Blue Jackets. We saw Sonny Milano score an unbelievable goal earlier this week as well, a local native to where I live. So that's great to see that. But overall, the Blue Jackets, it could be a tough year, but they're keeping things pretty tight so far. They're giving us hope that they could be a good team this year. It's just, with a 500 record in this division is going to be difficult. It's not sustainable to try and make a playoff run. Okay, so looking at number 6, we have, staying where they were last week, the Philadelphia Flyers, 2-1 on the season. 2-1 this week. So a pretty rough week for the Philadelphia Flyers. Things did not go their way this week. Unfortunately, they lost to the Vancouver Canucks in Vancouver last weekend. A 3-2 shootout loss in Vancouver. They would lose to the Calgary Flames 3-1. And when Carter Hart went back home to Edmonton, lived within 20 miles of Rogers Place, they would lose 6-3 in a barn burner in Edmonton. So, what do I think of the Philadelphia Flyers? Well, they're not getting the results. The record is still fairly decent considering they did not win this week. They are 2-1. They have 5 points on the season, so they aren't terribly, they aren't in a huge amount of trouble quite yet. But there are definitely some issues with this team that are going to be looked at. And, there's a team that, coming into the season, people had them making the playoffs. They made some moves this summer, bringing in guys like Hayes. They need those guys to be important pieces of this team, and they're really expecting a lot from Carter Hart this year. Fortunately, he really didn't play that well in Edmonton. They were hoping he would have a good comeback game. Really didn't have it there. They did lose in a shootout to Vancouver, so they were able to pick up a point this week. But besides that, out of a possible 6 points, they were only able to pick up 1 point. So tough start to the season here for Philly. I think they could turn things around, but there's definitely some issues there with the Flyers early on this season. So taking a look at number 5, and this was the team that moved the most in the Metro this week, and most notably because they didn't play a lot and they lost their games that they did play, and that is the New York Rangers, who were up from number 2 last week down to number 5 this week. So it's still so early in the year, so teams are going to move up and down until things start to balance out in a couple of weeks. But the New York Rangers dropped 3 spots. They're 2-0 this season, and 0-2 this week. So not a great week again for the New York Rangers. They did lose to the red-hot Edmonton Oilers on their surge through the Eastern area. They beat up on the Islanders. They beat the Devils, and the Rangers fell victim as well, losing 4-1 to the Oilers at home. And last night, unfortunately, the Rangers, they had off pretty much a week since they played the Oilers. They went into last night a little bit cold, and they unfortunately lost that one 5-2 against the New Jersey Devils. So put that together, you do the math, it's an 0-2 record for the New York Rangers this week. We don't really know what this team is yet because they just haven't played enough games, and we'll have to wait and see. I would expect them to be playing a lot more over the next couple of weeks. They've kind of had breaks, really long stretches of breaks here early in the season, and I don't know if they really want that. You'd probably want that in December, January, toward the end of the season when there's more injuries. They really don't have much injuries. They've only played 4 games, so these guys are well rested. Use it to their advantage, or it may end up hurting them later down the road as the season goes along. Looking at number 4, we have moving up 1 spot, the New York Islanders, 4-3-0 on the season and 3-1 this week. They would lose to the Carolina Hurricanes last Friday, 5-2. Not a great game by the Islanders. The goaltending is showing some issues there. They did score some goals, but you gave up 5 goals. That's not the way Lou Lamoriello and Barry Trotz want this team to be playing. So definitely a tough one there last Friday. But, to be fair, the Carolina Hurricanes are playing some very good hockey. So, throwing that one aside, then Saturday they would finish the back-to-back going back home against the Florida Panthers, where they would get a shootout victory, 3-2 over the Florida Panthers. So a big win there for the Islanders. It was a pretty close game. Some things here and there. Again, the goaltending was a little bit suspect at points, but overall, a very solid game, and the Islanders found a way to put a couple of goals in. And then Monday was the big game. I actually was able to go to this game on Monday. The Islanders against the St. Louis Blues, a 1 o'clock matinee game. Pretty much St. Louis dominated this entire game, I would say, for at least 50 minutes of this hockey game. The Islanders were in their zone most of the afternoon, and it really didn't look like the Islanders had much life or a pulse most of this game. The Blues kind of lulled the fans to sleep, including myself. Things were just not going the way for the Islanders. An early goal by the Blues in the first period kind of quieted the crowd, and late in the third period, midway in the period, a bad penalty. It's 2-0 Blues. It looks like Berube's team is pretty much in there. Jordan Binnington looks solid. Next thing you know, the Islanders pick up a goal. It's a 1-goal game with a couple of minutes left, 28 seconds left. The Islanders would tie the game, send this game to overtime, and they would end up winning this game thanks to a Devon Toews goal. Beautiful pass by Matt Barzal. So the Islanders did end up getting that victory, and things have started to look good for the Islanders. They have a 2-game winning streak, and now, last night, they head up to Winnipeg to start a road trip, and they continue the momentum. They head up to Winnipeg, return the favor to the Winnipeg Jets, a 3-1 victory for the Islanders. They were down 1-0, Nikolai Ehlers getting the first goal, and the Islanders would have to come back. They would end up getting an empty netter to finish things off, a 3-1 victory for the Islanders. And again, a game where they didn't really look all that great. They looked okay. They looked better than they did in the Blues game, but overall, I would have to say that the Jets played a very solid game, but they could not find the back of the net. Great game for Varlamov. He's had a tough start to the year, so good that he was able to, play a pretty solid game against the Jets. Okay, so moving on to number three. This team did not move this week. We have the Washington Capitals. So the team in the nation's capital is 4-2-2 this season, 2-1 this week. Things were a little bit shaky for this team this week overall. They definitely, they find a way to get 2 wins this week. But the new structure that they're playing in, where they're very aggressive, seems like the team is definitely not used to that. They're still, this is new to Todd Reardon as well as the players. The team is still adjusting to these new things that they are looking to do this year. So I think it's, considering, they're trying to transition the goaltending situation, it seems. We've seen Ilya Samsonov play a lot more hockey. And Braden Holtby really, he's been on and off this season. So it's going to give Samsonov more of an opportunity to transition himself right into that starting position possibly next season. So looking at the week, they played the Dallas Stars in Dallas, got a 4-1 victory in Dallas. They would head to Colorado, and fairly so, they did lose the Colorado Avalanche, who had the longest record of an undefeated season here in the NHL. Unfortunately, we have no more undefeated teams, but we'll get into that later. A 6-3 loss there against the Colorado Avalanche. And then they would come back against the Toronto Maple Leafs in a game that looked like Toronto had the game, could not finish things off. There was a called back goal by Jacob Vrana, and the Washington Capitals pretty much took all the momentum and surge from that situation, that no goal, and they ended up winning the game. And a pretty solid performance by the Caps. Again, you saw some issues. The Ilya Mikheyev goal was kind of a weird goal. Certain things that the Caps are still continuing to work on. That defense is, putting a lot of pressure moving forward. They're up on the blue line. They're not staying back, and it's worked for the Capitals. They have a fairly good record overall. They have 10 points on the season, but there's definitely a transition that we are seeing, and you wonder if teams are going to try and attack that defense a little bit more, knowing what the Capitals are, kind of showing in their cards so far this year. All right, so moving up a couple of spots, moving up 2 spots from number 4 to number 2 this week, we have the Pittsburgh Penguins, a 5-2 record for the Pittsburgh Penguins, 3-0 this week, so they're undefeated on the week. They get a victory in Minnesota against a struggling Minnesota Wild team, a 7-4 victory. They cash in on that. They head to Winnipeg on hometown hockey night last Sunday, and they quiet the crowd in Winnipeg with you may be seeing a pattern here. A 7-2 victory in Winnipeg. Then they play the Colorado Avalanche in Colorado and get a 3-2 overtime victory in a heartbreaking game for the Colorado Avalanche. Gabriel Landeskog kind of fumbling with the puck in front of the net. Unfortunately, puts it in his own net. He was visibly not too happy about that. The undefeated season comes to the end for the Colorado Avalanche, and a Pittsburgh team that has had some issues in terms of injuries, some new guys getting brought in, a little bit of a philosophy change possibly by Jim Rutherford over the summer, maybe trading, certain players, changing the culture, trading a guy like Phil Kessel out of town, bringing in Galchenyuk, who seems to be turning into Spider-Man. He got bit by a spider, and I'm hoping to make a video this weekend. Make sure to check that out, where we talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins, so stay tuned for that, and their recent hot streak that they've been on recently. Okay, so that leaves one team left, the process of elimination. Staying at number 1 for the 3rd week in a row, we have the Carolina Hurricanes holding down the top spot. They got to be careful, though, because the Pittsburgh Penguins seem to be right on them. They're 6-2 on the season. They pick up their first 2 losses of the season this week. They went 2-2 this week. A 5-2 victory at home last Friday night against the New York Islanders. A pretty solid performance there. They would lose to the Columbus Blue Jackets at home, 3-2. And then they would head to LA with a 2-0 victory, and then a 5-2 loss against San Jose. So this team's kind of been up and down. They're on the West Coast road trip right now after a long homestand. So this is really starting to test Rod Brendamore's team and seeing how good they really can be this year. So-so results. They're playing decent hockey, but you got to find a way to get these victories. Again, that LA victory, they were able to get a shutout. Peter Mrazek has looked very solid so far for the Carolina Hurricanes. besides the game the other night against San Jose. Other than that, I have to say the Carolina Hurricanes, again, they've got competition. If Washington starts to get this new system under their belt and they start mastering what they're trying to do, they get some breaks. Washington's going to be a contender for the top spot. Pittsburgh, if they go another week undefeated, they're going to be an issue. So Carolina's starting to see some competition. We're starting to see things start to bounce out a little bit. There are a couple of teams here and there, like the Rangers and the Flyers, that I'm not overly sure about. Even Columbus, we're not really sure what they are, but it's still very early in the season. So a quick recap real quick. At number 8, moving down a spot, we have the New Jersey Devils. Number 7, moving up a spot, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Staying at number 6 are the Philadelphia Flyers. Number 5, the New York Rangers moved down 3 spots down to number 5. The Islanders move up a spot to number 4. The Capitals stay put at number 3. Pittsburgh Penguins move up 2 spots this week, up to number 2, and the Carolina Hurricanes hold their spot at the top of the hill in the Metropolitan Division. All right, so that's it for the Metro. Let's get into the Atlantic Division. All right, so continuing with the Atlantic Division, leading the way at number 8, we have, staying at number 8, the Ottawa Senators. So the Ottawa Senators are 1-4-1 on the season. 1-1 this week. So they got a bunch of ones this week. They did start the week off very strong, beating the Tampa Bay Lightning at home 4-2. A great win there for the Ottawa Senators. Gives them a little bit of a confidence boost against a divisional opponent. Then they would go down. They would play the Minnesota Wild at home and lose 2-0 in a matinee game on Monday for Indigenous Day / Columbus Day. They would end up losing that game at home in a little bit of a snooze fest. And then they would play the Vegas Golden Knights last night in a game they really didn't deserve to get a point. There were a couple of tough calls by the officials, kind of on both sides, but I think it was more in favor of the Ottawa Senators. They were able to pay for that. The Ottawa Senators went 20 power plays without scoring a goal, so things have definitely not gone well for the Ottawa Senators. Hopefully they could turn things around. It was a 3-2 shootout loss last night, so against a fairly highly ranked team in Vegas, which is one of the toughest atmospheres in hockey to play in. They found a way to at least snag a point out of it, and considering their record, to even get a point, a pretty solid outing there for the Ottawa Senators. Hopefully something they could build on heading into week 4. Looking at number 7, staying at number 7, just spoiler here, not a ton of movement in the Atlantic Division this week, but there's a little bit, so we'll get into that. At number 7, we have the Florida Panthers, who are 2-2-2 to start the season, 1-0-2 this week. A 3-2 loss at Buffalo against the Buffalo Sabres, a shootout loss in that game, so they picked up a point. Then they would play the New York Islanders on Long Island against the Islanders, a 3-2 shootout loss, so 2 shootout losses in a row. Then they would head to New Jersey, where they would pick up a 6-3 victory in a matinee game on Monday. So, looking at the Florida Panthers, again, their record is, it's not great. It's not bad either. It's just mediocre. We don't really know what this team is so far. We haven't seen Sergei Bobrovsky completely blow the doors off of how good he is and this and that, and some of those additions that they picked up in the offseason. Joe Quenneville, again, he didn't coach last season, so he may need to adjust a little bit to how, his game plan is, trying to figure out all his players. So this is going to be a process in Florida. You can't expect things to change just, at the drop of a hat. This was a team that, has missed the playoffs over the past couple of years. They've made it here and there, but overall this has been an unsuccessful team. They need a little bit of time to change things around. Yes, they, added some cornerstone pieces, in guys like Bobrovsky and Anton Strawman and a couple of depth players like Noah Cherry and Brett Connolly, but there's still some issues with this team, specifically on the defense. They've got some good players back there, but there's definitely a little bit of a changing of the guard on this team that we will continue to see over the next couple of years. So overall, not a great start to the season, but not a terrible start either. They can build off of this. Well, this is a team that did not have a great week. They dropped down, pretty mightily. They dropped down 3 spots. We have the Detroit Red Wings down at number 6 this week, 3-4-0 to start the season, and 0-3 this week. So they did not pick up a point out of a possible 6 points in these 3 games that they played, and one of them being against a rival, a destinational rival. In the Toronto Maple Leafs at home, they would drop that game to the Leafs 5-2. Then they would go on a little bit of a Western Canadian road trip where they continue in Edmonton tonight. They played the Vancouver Canucks. They lost that game 5-1 in convincing fashion, as well as to Calgary last night 5-1. So there's a theme here. The team is struggling a little bit out of the, they looked really solid out of the gate. They were pretty high up in the power rankings in week 1. I actually had them at number 5. I thought they were a little bit more for real last week. They moved up to number 3, but unfortunately they find themselves back down here at number 6. So the lowest they've been since our first the longest, the furthest down they've been in the power rankings thus far. So overall, again, you head on the West Coast, things change a little bit. They got to play Edmonton tonight. Not going to be any easier than the 2 teams they've already played in Vancouver and Calgary. So, maybe they could catch, Edmonton. They're a little bit, they're feeling good. They just played a good game against the Philadelphia Flyers at home. This is a team we have a lot to see what they're going to do. Are they going to just play this like it's any other game? And, I think Detroit needs to show a little bit of desperation in this game. Not necessarily because they make the playoffs or not because of this game, but just for this road trip, just to get something out of this road trip would be huge for Stevie Y and the Detroit Red Wings. Okay, so looking at number 5, we have moving up a spot thanks to the Red Wings' struggles this week are the Montreal Canadiens. So they are 3-2-1 on the season and 2-1 this week. They would win a game 6-3 over the St. Louis Blues when the Blues came onto the East Coast. They would lose 3-1 to the Tampa Bay Lightning at home. Then they would get a convincing 4-0 victory last night over the Minnesota Wild. Great game by Carey Price, Nick Suzuki, and Victor Mete scoring their first NHL goals. So great sight to see there with that. But overall, the Canadiens, again, this team is going to ride a lot on their big guys. You're talking about Shea Weber on the back end and Carey Price in net. This team needs those guys to stay healthy. They have some really great young talent coming up the wings here and there, but that scoring is a little bit concerning. Obviously not last night. They just need to be consistent with that. I think since Claude Julien's come in, there's been a little bit more structure in this team. I think it's paying off little by little. They're hoping to make the playoffs this year. They have a 3-2-1 record. It's not necessarily a winning record, but they do have 7 points on the season so far, so not too bad for the Montreal Canadiens. Moving up a couple of spots here, we have moving up 1 spot is the Tampa Bay Lightning. 4-2-1 on the season, 2-1 this week, so a pretty solid week for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They did have that loss in Ottawa against the Ottawa Senators, and that was their real blemish this week. They would go into Montreal, get a 3-1 victory, as well as head up to Boston and get a 4-3 shootout win as well. So couple of divisional opponents. They dropped one of those, probably one of the weakest teams in the NHL, and then they would come in and beat a pretty solid Boston team who's been pretty good, and a mediocre average team in Montreal on the road nonetheless. So still big games for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They can build off of that. Braden Point has been stellar. Nice to see Steven Stamkos getting on the board here and there. Got a nice goal against the Bruins in the shootout. So Tampa Bay is starting to get the gears shifting. They're oiling up, and they're ready to go for a big year this year. They may not try and come out of the gate like some of these teams like Boston and Colorado. They want to pace themselves and put together a very solid season past 82 games as well, which they don't want to think about yet. They haven't clinched, but they certainly have that on their mind this year. Looking at number 3, moving up a spot, is the Toronto Maple Leafs. So the Maple Leafs are 4-3-1 on the season, 2-1 this week. A 5-2 victory in Detroit to start the week, a 4-2 win against the Minnesota Wild at home, and then they would drop a tough game in Washington, a 4-3 loss against the Caps, a game that they probably should have won there. They did drop that game against the Washington Capitals, a game they absolutely should have won. There was a called back goal against the Capitals with Verona, and the team that really should have taken that momentum should have been the Maple Leafs. They should have thought, all right, we caught a break here. Let's not give up anymore. Well, they ended up giving up 2 goals, 4-2. You get a little, a sweet time goal, which is 4-3, just to make the score look better. But at that point, it's already over, and the Toronto Maple Leafs drop a game they probably should have won. Again, they're not standing out as one of these super hot teams to start the season. They're not the sexy pick to start the year here, but they're playing very good hockey. Again, now you've got Tavares out with injury, so how does that affect the lineup? So there's gonna be some changes with that team. We've already seen the defensive shuffling a little bit. We've seen Sandin get called down, Kevin Gravel getting called up. So they're definitely trying different things here. Kyle Dubas, has to figure out what he's going to do with this roster. But overall, the Toronto Maple Leafs look okay. Good enough to be number 3 in the division. I think that's fair. I think this is a team, it's again, they're almost trying to do what a team like Toronto and Boston, they're all going to be trying to pace themselves. They're looking at the end goal. They want to have a good playoff run this year. And this is going to be a very competitive division. So I'd love to see what this division looks like in April. All right, so number 2, staying at number 2, is the Buffalo Sabres, the Red Hot Sabres, 6-1-1 to start the season, 3-1 this week. They would pick up a victory at home against the Florida Panthers, a 3-2 shootout win. They would pick up a win against the Dallas Stars at home, a 4-0 victory there. They would drop a game to the Anaheim Ducks in Anaheim on their recent West Coast road trip, and they did come back last night with a 3-0 victory, a shutout victory for the Buffalo Sabres in Los Angeles against the Kings. So, Buffalo Sabres, this is a little bit, I don't want to remind people, but, for Christmas last year, Buffalo Sabres PR was selling playoff tickets. They were, the best team in hockey. Tampa was, actually behind the Buffalo Sabres for the, toward the top of the NHL. And, we know what happened in January into April with this Buffalo team. So, is this fool's gold? Is it real? Again, I think the issue with this team is they're very front load. They have their guys like Jack Eichel, but I'm telling you, what's concerning me about a team like Buffalo and a team like Carolina, I'm a little bit worried about the goaltending situation. You've got Carter Hutton, who came over from St. Louis, and he was a very solid, 1A, 1B option. How good would he be as the starter for 40 to 60 games? It's a little bit different. But again, nonetheless, there's a Buffalo team. I mean, we see guys like Casey Middlestat really coming onto the scene. He has a great line there with Jimmy Vesey. They're putting up some numbers, as well as Connor Sherry. Jack Eichel is playing out of this world. He's playing great. Rasmus Ristolainen is a very good defenseman as well. You could see a little bit of frustration from him as well, though, in interviews and things like that. I think he wants to win, and he may be a little bit concerned still with this Buffalo team. Maybe not right now. The second this team, goes on a 3 or 4 game losing streak, he'll probably be one of the first guys to be a little bit ticked off. Rasmus Dahlin's continuing to develop into a very solid defenseman, and it would be a crime if I didn't say anything about Gustav Olofsson, who came over, a former 7th round draft pick at 23 years old now. He's had some time to marinate with the Rochester Americans in the American Hockey League as well as overseas. He has become a very solid, he's been a diamond in the rough, and a former 7th round pick has really, become an early Calder favorite for Rookie of the Year in 2019. So, overall, Buffalo has some things to be excited about, guys like Middlestat and Olofsson, but again, the goaltending is a little bit concerning for me, and how much longer can Jack Eichel play the way he has played to start the season this year? Okay, so that leaves staying at number 1 once again. This is a little bit boring, but at number 1, staying put at the top, of the Atlantic is the Boston Bruins. A 5-1-1 record on the season, so pretty nice numbers there. 2-0-1 this week, having one blemish against the Tampa Bay Lightning at home. 3-0 shutout victory against the New Jersey Devils, taking advantage of a struggling Devils team. A very hot Anaheim Ducks team comes into Boston. A 4-2 victory in a matinee game there for the Boston Bruins, and the Tampa Bay Lightning did come in and get a shootout victory against these guys. So they did lose once this week. They did pick up 5 points this week, though. So a very solid week for the Boston Bruins. Record-wise, you could say that Buffalo is better, but I don't know. I like Tuukka Rask. I like the goaltending there. They've got some very solid defense there in Boston. You know, the structure seems to be there. Like I said, Buffalo, if they can keep this up, it'll look great. But I'm still a little bit worried about that roster, specifically the depth in Buffalo. So that's just a quick recap. At number 8, we have the Ottawa Senators staying put at 8. The Panthers staying put at number 7. The Detroit Red Wings taking pretty much the biggest drop in the NHL this week for the power rankings, down from number 3 down to number 6. The Montreal Canadiens move up to number 5. Tampa Bay Lightning move up to number 4. Toronto stays put at number 3. The Buffalo Sabres stay at number 2, and the Boston Bruins stay at number 1. Let's take a look at the Western Conference. All right, so taking a look at the Pacific Division, we are taking a look at the bottom. Start things off, moving down from number 7 down to number 8 is the Los Angeles Kings, moving down a spot this week in the power rankings. The Los Angeles Kings are 2-5 to start the season, 1-3 this week. They would get a victory against the Nashville Predators 7-4 at home, so this team does have a pulse. They can score goals. They would unfortunately come back with a loss against a regional rival in the Vegas Golden Knights, a 5-2 loss there. They would lose to the Carolina Hurricanes 2-0 in a shutout loss, as well as another shutout loss at home. So back-to-back shutout losses, 3-0, 2-0 against Carolina, and 3-0 last night against the Buffalo Sabres. So, you know, earlier in the week, in 2 games, they put up 9 goals, specifically 7 against Nashville, who has a very solid defense. You know, they were able to put up 7 goals, and then they just come flat. You're at home and you're on a homestand, and you don't put up any goals in 2 games. You get shut out in both games against a Carolina team who Peter Mrazek has been hot to come out of the gate. They have a very solid defense there in Carolina. And Buffalo, who that goaltending is a little bit shaky, maybe a little bit hot just coming out of the gate here. But they do have good a pretty solid defensive group back there as well. But again, nonetheless, you know, you still get shut out in 2 games. And there's a team that wanted to come in and, you know, maybe get back into the playoffs, squeak in. Again, this is the division to do it. There's a lot of teams, you know, kind of on the cusp or maybe starting to fall back a little bit. Unfortunately, Los Angeles seems to be one of the teams that just continues to fall back. We'll have to see what happens with this team. Overall, things have not started too well for the Kings. It's kind of expected, but it is still a shame considering all the, you know, the accolades they were getting back in the early, you know, the mid 2010s when they were winning, and, you know, 2 cups in 3 years, and one of the, you know, arguably one of the dynasties in the modern era of hockey. You know, it seems like the floors kind of fell out from under them at this point. At number 7, we do have a not so great news here. The Arizona Coyotes slipped from number 6 down to number 7 this week. 3-2-1 on the season, 2-0-1 this week. So they would lose to the Colorado Avalanche in a close game in Colorado, a 3-2 overtime loss. So they did pick up a point in Colorado. They would go on to Winnipeg and win against the new Winnipeg Jets. They've not beaten the Winnipeg Jets since they've come into Winnipeg in Winnipeg. So a very big win there. In terms of the franchise for the Arizona Coyotes, a 4-2 win there. And then they would go and beat the Nashville Predators at home last night. It looked pretty close for most of the game. They were tied at 2-2, and Arizona kind of ran away with it. Phil Kessel with 2 goals. They would win that one 5-2. The Arizona Coyotes, you know, again, it's night. I was going to say Phil Kessel is he as good as they're hoping he's going to be? Well, he proved it last night, picking up 2 goals. They need to stay consistent. The goaltending needs to be solid throughout most of the season. If they could play average, if they could have average goaltending the whole season, they will be fine. Rick Tockett's really starting to get into these guys and really, making them believe that they have a chance this year. And, again, 2-0-1, they probably shouldn't have dropped a spot this week, but the other team that we're going to talk about next kind of turned things around this week, and fortunately they were able to get the edge this week. So let's segue into that. So I'm wearing their jersey as a spoiler. We have moving up 2 spots from the bottom of the division up 2 spots to number 6 this week. We have the San Jose Sharks. So San Jose Sharks did not start the season. They pretty much shocked everybody. They went 1-3 or 1-4 to start the season, and they have come back. They were 3-4 to start this season. Now they have a 3-4 record, 2-0 this week. They would beat the Calgary Flames 3-1 and beat the Carolina Hurricanes 5-2. So some solid victories. They're putting up goals. They're not giving up a ton of goals. This is a solid San Jose team. Which team is the real one? Is it the team we saw the first 5 games of the year, or the recent last 3 or 4 games? So this is a team we're going to have to pay attention to. They seem to be getting back on the rise. They seem a little bit more motivated since Patrick Marleau got in. Maybe it was just a little kick in the boot for them that just got them going. But overall, San Jose is back, and let's hope that it's for real this time. Okay, so at number 5, from number 3 down to number 5, we have the Calgary Flames, 4-3-1 on the season, 2-2 this week. So not terribly bad. The record really isn't, all that stellar either, but they're finding a way to at least stay 500. They did have a road trip in there as well on the West Coast. They would lose 6-2 against the Vegas Golden Knights. Could not survive in Vegas for that one. They did lose the San Jose Sharks, who are turning things on a little bit, as we just mentioned. 3-1 victory for the San Jose Sharks in that one. They would beat the Philadelphia Flyers 3-1, and they would beat the Detroit Red Wings at home 5-1. So, the first half of the week really wasn't all that great for Calgary. They would come back home, back into Alberta, and they would pick up 2 victories against 2 Eastern teams coming out west for the first time this year, and things didn't really go their way. So, good job by the Calgary Flames taking advantage. Last night was a weird game against Detroit. It seemed like there were a couple breaks that they may have gotten, specifically with the Darren Helm situation. I think that was really the turning point in the game. As if the game wasn't, it was already 3-1 at that point. They were beating a dead horse. It was 4-1, and they ended up winning the game 5-1. So, I have to say, though, Jimmy Howard did not look all that great in that game either. That's something that's going to, probably haunt the Detroit Red Wings. We don't, how good is Jonathan Bernier, now Jimmy Howard? There's going to be an interesting goaltending tandem this year in the NHL. Very unpredictable with Jimmy Howard and Jonathan Bernier. And unfortunately, they didn't look too great last night. So at number 4, moving up a spot thanks to the Calgary Flames, was the Vancouver Canucks, 4-2-0 on the season, and they went undefeated this week. One of the few teams to go undefeated, 3-0 this week. They would beat the Philadelphia Flyers at home 3-2 last weekend, a shootout victory there. They would beat the Detroit Red Wings 5-1, and then they would head to St. Louis and beat the St. Louis Blues 4-3 in a shootout victory, taking advantage of a Blues team that has struggled to close out games. We've seen it a couple of times. We'll get into that when we talk about the St. Louis Blues a little bit later, but great resiliency by the Vancouver Canucks, facing a little bit of controversy in this game. They found a way to get things going. They would beat the Red Wings at home in convincing fashion. A team in Detroit that was pretty hot coming into that game, so a big victory there for Vancouver. Let's hope this thing with Bo Horvat continues to lead them moving forward. They ride this train into November, and they have a pretty solid record heading through the first quarter of this season. Looking at number 3, we have moving up a spot is the Vegas Golden Knights, 5-3 to start the season, 3-1 this week. They would beat the Calgary Flames at home 6-2. They would beat the Los Angeles Kings on the road in Hollywood 5-2. They would drop a game at home against the Nashville Predators 5-2. But they ended the week last night with a victory against the Ottawa Senators in a controversial game, a 3-2 shootout victory for the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, some would say that there was bad officiating in certain games. In the Calgary game, the Calgary Detroit game, in this game between the Golden Knights and Ottawa. Listen, unfortunately, things are going to happen. The officials aren't going to see everything, and when you put your heart into it and you see, oh, you made a mistake, and it's annoying, but honestly, I think Vegas deserved to win that game. I think the officials were a little bit more on the Ottawa Senators side last night. They find a way to fight through it, and it was a big victory for Vegas at home to close out the week. Against a struggling team there in Ottawa, they did pick up a victory against the Kings as well and Calgary, so some solid, division rival teams they were able to get victories against, was able to help them move up in this week's power rankings. All right, so staying put at number 2, we have the Anaheim Ducks, who are 5-2 to start this year. A little bit of a surprising start here for the Anaheim Ducks. 2-1 this week. They would go up to Columbus and win that one 2-1. They would lose in a matinee game last Monday, 4-2 in Boston, but they would come back and beat the Buffalo Sabres 5-2 to close out the week at home. So this is a very solid Anaheim team, specifically that defense. It seems like, the new coaching situation, the structure is a little bit different in Anaheim, and they seem to be taking well to it. Sheldon Keefe is doing a great job so far with the Anaheim Ducks. Hopefully this team continues to, they're surprising people right now, and I don't think they're much of a sleeper now. I think it's well known that Anaheim is one of the better teams. They did lose to the Boston Bruins, but the Boston Bruins are arguably right around the same area as them. So, these are two very solid teams. And Anaheim's really proving, we're into week 3 now, and they haven't fallen off yet. So we'll see how much longer they can last. John Gibson, has really been good. He's really helped this team stay in games and close out games. Something like another team in St. Louis that we'll talk about later on hasn't recently been able to do. It's starting to affect their record. But nonetheless, Anaheim, some of the young guys are playing very well there in Anaheim, as well as guys like Getzlaf, who are staying in there, playing on the third line, and getting things done. Looking at number 1, no surprise here, not moving down. One of the last teams to have an undefeated record. Staying put at number 1 in the Pacific is the Edmonton Oilers, 6-1 on the season, 2-1 this week. The fans are getting excited in Edmonton, and rightfully so. 6-1 to start the year, a very solid record for the Oilers. Is this finally the year the Oilers not only get into the playoffs like they did a couple of years ago, but are a legitimate contender to win that Stanley Cup? We're seeing the resemblance now of what we thought we would see from the Oilers a couple of years ago between Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, that chemistry. It's kind of the structure that we've seen in Pittsburgh between Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. They're world beaters, the two of these players, and they're really carrying the team on their back. The goaltending has been fairly solid, as well as the new coaching staff has really helped get things going with Dave Tippett. He's built a structure on that defense, and they've looked fairly solid this to start the year. Goaltending, Mike Smith has looked fairly good. This is very exciting here with the Edmonton Oilers. They would go onto Broadway last week and play the New York Rangers in the Garden. 4-1 victory for the Oilers, and that one a well-rested Rangers team as well. So they may have caught the Rangers on napping a little bit. They hadn't played a lot. Really, they haven't played a lot to start the year. So a good win there for the Edmonton Oilers. A 3-1 loss in Chicago, a close game. They just could not get that tying goal. They scored late, but couldn't get the evening goal. Unfortunately, gave up an empty netter at the end of the day. A 6-3 win at home against the Philadelphia Flyers, and Carter Hutton coming back to his hometown. They made him, unfortunately, give up a couple of goals and get a little exposed. So, good job by the Edmonton Oilers. It's so fun watching the Oilers play right now, seeing how James Neal has completely changed his game. Leon Draisaitl is firing on all cylinders. We all know that little guy named Connor McDavid, just how good he is. He's playing at a different level this year. His skating is unbelievable. He is such a fast skater, and the way he moves, north and south, just an unbelievable player, and hopefully a indication of what things could be coming to the Edmonton Oilers, not only this year, but moving forward over the next couple of years. All right, so that's it for the Pacific Division. Just a quick recap. At number 8, we have the Los Angeles Kings. Number 7, moving down, is the Arizona Coyotes. San Jose Sharks moving up 2 spots to number 6. The Calgary Flames dropping a couple spots down to number 5. The Vancouver Canucks moving up to 4. Vegas moving up to 3. The Anaheim Ducks staying put at number 2. And the Edmonton Oilers hold their spot at the top of the fortress in the Pacific at number 1. All right, so taking a look to wrap things up here, we have the Central Division, where we are going to take a look at this division that's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde division. It looks like we have the haves and the have-nots in this division. So let's get right into it. So moving down a spot is actually moving down 2 spots this week. We have the Dallas Stars sitting at number 7 in the Central. They are 5-1 to start the season, 0-3 on the week. A home loss to the Washington Capitals, 4-1. They would go up to Buffalo and get shut out 4-0, and they would lose on the road in Columbus the other night, Wednesday night, in a 3-2 loss there. So to say things have not gone well for the Dallas Stars is an understatement. They have not looked that great. We did see some guys starting to put in goals. We saw Heiskanen score a goal. Rupe Hentz has played very well. But what happens when they start to shut down Rupe Hentz? Because, that's going to be a little bit of an issue for this team. The goaltending has been good. I think fans are starting to get frustrated in Dallas. Rightfully so. It seems like, a couple of years ago they had the team around it to really get things going, but the goaltending was really holding them back. Well, of course, when they fixed the goaltending, the roster itself doesn't look that good. So it's never both for the Dallas Stars, seemingly. They did make the playoffs last year, so they're expecting playoffs this year, but start the season, things have not gone well. Tyler Seguin, he's a solid player, but is he, is he a superstar the way, maybe that Dallas hoped he would be? Jamie Benn, kind of seems like he's starting to go into the decline stage of his career. It's interesting with Dallas. I wonder what's going to happen this year. I'm a little bit concerned if I'm a Dallas Stars fan because, it's a little bit of uncertainty with this team right now. So good thing for this team that Dallas did not do well. They were able to reap the benefits of that. Moving up a spot is the Minnesota Wild, who also have a pretty awful record at 1-6 to start the year, 1-2 on the season. They would lose 7-4 to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who have been very good. So that's, again, this is a solid team that they had to play against. They did end up scoring 4 goals against Pittsburgh, so that's pretty good. They would beat the Ottawa Senators on the road in a snooze fest. They were able to, they played pretty much a perfect road game in Ottawa. A 1 o'clock matinee game. They were able to keep things pretty quiet there, and they picked up a very important victory, their first of the season. So congrats there to Minnesota. But unfortunately, they would head to Toronto, where they would lose 4-2, and then they would play the Montreal Canadiens last night, where they would lose 4-0. So again, it's pretty much the same for this team. They're just not winning enough. And unfortunately, they're giving up too many goals. You saw 7 goals in the first game. They did put up a goose egg against the Ottawa Senators, so a good job there. But then again, you lose 4-2. You give up 4 against, both the Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're both they're very potent teams. But again, 4 goals. Zach Parise hasn't looked that great. Matt Dumba turned the puck over last night. It's really, you just wonder what's going on with this team. Is there some lagging injuries? Or maybe they just know, the mindset isn't that great. Jason Zucker actually, said something today. He's frustrated about what's going on. He had, a hot take about the team, and rightfully so. He's trying to get the team, try and light a fire under this team. Try and motivate them. Luke Cunning got into a fight last night, so that was pretty nice. Just something to just wake this team up. Dubnyk did not play last night, so maybe Stalock just isn't as good as they hoped he would be. Dubnyk did have a nice moment, though, a nice gesture, giving a young fan his mask to take a picture with, so that was nice to see. Love seeing things like that, but the on-ice product has not been great for the Wild, and we'll have to see. It may be Dallas and Minnesota fighting for that bottom of the Central most of the power rankings throughout this season. So at number 5, moving up a spot thanks to the Dallas Stars, is the Chicago Blackhawks. 1-2-1 to start the season, 1-0-1 this week. They would lose in overtime against the Winnipeg Jets at home, but they would come back and take off the undefeated Edmonton Oilers, the then undefeated Oilers, in a 3-1 victory at home. So Chicago Blackhawks are showing, they have the potential to be a team that can win games here and there. They came close with Winnipeg, but they didn't get the victory. They only have one win on the season in 4 games. They're one of those teams where they really haven't played much to start the year, so they may be a little bit behind on some of these teams. Once they get going and they're playing games, 3 or 4 games a week, they may be a little bit more into it, and just it's more of a pattern and a rhythm. These teams that have had off a lot in the beginning of the year are not finding much success. You look at the Rangers and now Chicago. You just wonder if once they get things going, hopefully they could, get in a routine and really start to, put things together. So at number 4, moving down 2 spots this week, we do have the St. Louis Blues. We're 3-1-3 to start the season. A little bit of a weird record. 0-1-2 on the week. They would lose 6-3 at Montreal against the Montreal Canadiens. Stunned against the New York Islanders Monday in a 3-2 loss on Long Island in overtime. And then they would lose at home against the Vancouver Canucks in another, past 60 minutes game in a shootout loss. So the Montreal game, they just, I don't know what happened in that Montreal game. They just gave up a lot of goals, and not that Montreal doesn't have, a lethal group, but that's a lot of goals to give up out of Montreal, and again, it's a little bit weird what's going on there. I think they had the backup in for that game, but nonetheless, she's still giving up 6 goals against Montreal. I don't really like that too much. The Islander game, they played very solid. I actually went to the game. They played very solid, but again, you give up, 10, maybe not even. I'll give the Blues their credit. At least 50 to 55 minutes of this game, the Blues dominated. They dominated most of this game. The Islanders took bad penalties. The puck was in the Islanders' zone for most of the time, and unfortunately, the Blues just kind of gave up toward the end of the game. They thought they had the game. They were very confident. The Islander crowd was shut out. It was silent most of the day. And then, Brock Nelson scores a weird goal off Binnington. And Binnington just, again, a fluky goal in front of the net, goes off your own, teammate's skate in front of the net. 28 seconds left. There's nothing you could do. Binnington stormed off the ice after the overtime goal. He was frustrated, as he should have been. I mean, that was a game that they should have gotten 2 points with. As well as the Vancouver game last night. Kind of the same story. They were up 3-2, and they couldn't hold the lead, and they lost the game in a shootout. So, not to say that the Islanders or Vancouver are bad teams, but they're mediocre teams. They have mediocre records, and, well, more so Vancouver, they did go undefeated this week. But still, it's kind of the same story where you gave up a game that you should, that's 2 points now. It was, all right, so we lost out on 1 point. Well, now it's 2 points that they lost in 2 games. So, that's another win off the column, and that could be the difference for this team at the end of the season. It makes coaches crazy. It makes, I'm sure, Doug Armstrong and Craig Berube are not happy about this. They're probably pulling their hair out of their head because these were games that they should have won. They should have had another 2 points on the season. The positive, they did get 2 points out of games that they lost. But the negative, they really should have had 4 points instead of the 2 that they ended up with at the end of this week. I think they could turn this around. They have the the leadership to do it. We saw what they did last year. it's one of those things. They have a good coaching staff back there. You just got to put things together. We know Binnington is very known for not showing a lot of emotion. He needs to stay even keel as much as possible. He's really developed into a leader on this team himself, just setting a good example and just staying with, going with the flow, and whatever happens, happens. They will find success. They have the talent. They just need to stick with it. And I think the Blues could easily move up again next week. So looking at number 3, they stay put at number 3, is the Nashville Predators, who went 4-3-0 here to start the season, 1-2 this week. So not a great week here for the Nashville Predators. They would head to Hollywood, a 7-4 loss against the Los Angeles Kings. They would head to Vegas, where they did get a victory, a 5-2 victory in Vegas. But unfortunately, last night they would head to Arizona and lose 5-2 in a game that was pretty close up until midway through the second period, and the Coyotes kind of took over from there. I think Nashville, again, there's a team we expected maybe a little bit more from. 4-3 is not a bad record, but we are hoping for a little bit more from the Predators. Some people did actually say they may regress a little bit this year. There's some changes on this team. They did lose Subban. Doesn't matter what they brought back. They did lose an active player for the team this year in Subban. So just some little changes here and there. It may, end up affecting this team, but, Pekka Rinne has to stay healthy. UC Saros, the goaltending has to be solid this year, and it's been a little bit shaky here and there to start the season. So moving up 2 spots this week from number 4 up to number 2, we have the Winnipeg Jets, 4-4-0. You're not going to see this very often. 1-2 this week, and they moved up 2 spots. So that's just how I felt about Nashville and St. Louis, just to give you some context. This division, you're scraping to figure out who's really who fits where. And again, I think it comes down to Winnipeg in their losses. They did look fairly solid. I'll give them the credit for that. They did look okay in these games. They did beat the Chicago Blackhawks 3-2, an overtime victory there. They would lose to the Arizona Coyotes. They're one of their blemishes this week. And last night they did lose at home again to the New York Islanders by a score of 3-1. So, Winnipeg, again, like that game against the Islanders, they played fairly well, and they probably should have won that game. They just didn't put up enough goals, and they gave up an empty netter at the end. This was a very close game. The Arizona game, again, kind of the same story. It was a close game up until the end. That defense is starting to concern me with Winnipeg. We actually saw Morrissey come off last night, either a stick to the face or a puck to the face, so hopefully he's okay. But Winnipeg can't afford an injury. That defense is like glass. In terms of it's very fragile. There's that depth has to get experience. Some of those young guys like Sami Niku, some of the other guys they've had to call up, I don't even know their names. So, there's a team that, I think they're going to be in the right direction. This is a transition year for them. We would have been surprised if they did, a whole lot better than this to start the year. Again, they're still 4-4. They don't have a bad record. With all the skepticism and all the things they had to deal with coming into the season with Line and Connor, I'd have to say they're handling it pretty well here out of the gate. Pretty much through the first 10 games at this point. Okay, so looking at number 1 in the Central Division, no changes here. Unfortunately, this was the last team to get knocked off. We don't have any more undefeated teams in the NHL. But sitting at 5-1, sitting pretty at the top of the Central, is the Colorado Avalanche. 5-1 to start the season, 2-1 this week. A 3-2 overtime victory against the Arizona Coyotes. A 6-3 win in Washington against the Capitals. But unfortunately, that did not continue when they went back home to play the Pittsburgh Penguins, who came in, one of the hotter teams in the NHL right now in Pittsburgh. They did lose that one 3-2 in overtime. A heartbreaking loss for the Avs there. Their captain, Landeskog, in front of the net. The puck was kind of on edge. It was fumbling around. He tried moving it out of the way. He got his stick and knocked it right into the net. He was frustrated about that, broke his stick. But besides that, I like Colorado. I think, again, we really talk about this Central Division being a very, very solid division this year. It may end up, normally this is a very tough division. You look at, the past couple of years, you look at Colorado, who, was always in the mix, with guys with McKinnon and Landeskog, Winnipeg when they, drafted Patrick Laine, Kyle Connor being a great surprise, and that unbelievable defense they had. The Nashville Predators with that really solid group that they've had there. St. Louis obviously coming off of a Stanley Cup championship. The Chicago Blackhawks, we know what we have in Chicago, and a Dallas team that's always been on the fringe of a playoff berth. Again, some of these teams seem like they are regressing a little bit. Some of them we haven't seen a ton from. I'm still on the edge here with Chicago. They've only played 4 games, so we don't really know what we've seen out of them. But besides that, most of the division, you kind of have an idea of what it is. A 500 team second in the division. It's not a terribly great look. They kind of beat each other up. And Colorado is able to be the little bit of a shining star in that Central Division, and they will be quite happy with that, especially with the moves they made in the offseason. There were pretty high expectations for Colorado this year, so glad to see that Nazem Kadri, a couple of those other additions, have fit in pretty well with this team. So let me know what you guys think of this week's power rankings. Is there anything you would change? Do you like the new format with the visual? I feel like that helps a little bit when you're watching. Maybe, I'm not explaining it perfect or whatever. I make mistakes too. So it's good to have a visual. I know I'm a visual person, so it's easier to see, the actual context that I'm talking about. So let me know, what do you guys think of the new setup with that? Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe. Make sure to stay tuned every Friday as well as this weekend, as we're going to be making some videos talking about the Penguins. We are going to be talking about the 2020 NHL Draft. I know, so make sure to check those videos out in the very near future, and stay tuned every Friday for the latest power rankings. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.